Good afternoon. I'm Eric Linask from TMC, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all today to what I think is going to be a very exciting and informational and entertaining, hopefully, live webinar. Today's topic is the 2018 NPS Benchmark Study, and we're going to take a look at some of the results and get some reactions from our esteemed panel today. Now, first and foremost, I guess maybe the first question to answer is NPS, Net Promoter Score, what is it? Well, I think it's safe to say that it has effectively become the standard of measurement of customer loyalty to a brand today. It has often in the past been really viewed as an executive level metric, kind of collected and talked about and looked at really once a year within that small group of executives, not really making it available for company-wide or corporate-wide action. More recently, though, for anybody that's followed the industry, there's really been a new standard of empowerment that's been set at all levels of organizations, driving customer and leveraging customer insight to increase revenue and customer retention. You know, much like many other success metrics, NPS is really becoming part of that holistic customer engagement and corporate growth strategy. It's really a customer-fueled approach to business growth that has evolved into something of a culture shift within forward-thinking businesses. It's by embracing this customer-centric culture that we read about today and understanding the value of actionable feedback and automation that companies are able to drive change throughout their organizations, really fast-tracking their brands to what can end up being completely new levels of success and customer loyalty. Now, as part of today's panel, I'm really excited to be joined by four fantastic co-speakers today. And as I introduce you all, you know what, I'd love to have each of you introduce yourself really quickly, a couple words about yourself or about your NPS program or your role with NPS programs within your organizations, anything that you'd like our audience to know. First, we have Nina Church-Adams, who is the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Acton Software.
Hi, everyone. Nina Church-Adams here. As I mentioned, I lead the marketing team here at Acton. Acton is an adaptive marketing platform that drives personal and purposeful multi-channel marketing. And I joined the Acton team earlier this year, and we really made a cross-functional decision to revisit our NPS strategy, and that is what connected us to the team over at Ask Nicely. And I'm really excited to join the conversation today and share some lessons from our journey to really define the way that we're collecting and activating NPS and voice of the customer data here at Acton. So excited to be here.
Thank you, Nina. We also have Annie Wu, who is the Senior Vice President of Consumer Service at MindBody, Inc.
Hi, everyone. Annie here. I work at MindBody, specifically on the MindBody app found in the Google Play and iTunes Store and on our MindBody.io consumer website. I've been with MindBody for 13 years, and prior to working on the B2C consumer product side, I worked in the B2B side of the company, building out services for our core business SaaS product. So really from garage to global company and IPO acquisitions, we have a lot of lumps on the head, including implementing the successful NPS program, which, of course, Ask Nicely has helped us to get to a better place. It's really great to be here, and I look forward to discussing the results with everyone.
Thanks, Annie. We also have Leah Cheney, the Vice President of Customer Success at Ask Nicely.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Really excited to be a part of this. I have the honor of heading up our customer success team here at Ask Nicely and working with amazing people like Annie and Nina. So thanks for letting me be here.
And we have Mitchell Hansen, VP of Marketing at Ask Nicely.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, really awesome to bring this great group together today. And I'm running marketing at Ask Nicely, and includes things like content such as the benchmark study, and just getting out our message of showing our customers how to deliver great experiences by sort of doing NPS in a forward-thinking manner. So great to do that today.
Excellent. Welcome to our 4 panelists. Welcome to our audience. Really briefly, some of the things that we're going to be covering today are NPS scores, response rates, process maturity, and growth trends by industry, and kind of how those things all relate to business success. We're going to go over the 5 characteristics of advanced NPS programs. Thanks to Nina and Annie in particular, we've got some real-world examples of how you can take action on feedback and what happens when you don't. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how NPS is evolving to touch all parts of organizations. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. The first thing really is, are companies using NPS? And the survey, this most recent survey really shows that, while 46% is a pretty good number, we're not yet at that tipping point. We're not yet at that 50-50 mark that, the industry kind of likes to get to and sort of pushes us into more positive momentum. We're getting closer, but there's still a lot of work to be done to get to a point where really businesses across the board and across industries are maximizing on the value of their customer and their customer relationship. So 46% are using NPS. What are the other 54% doing? There are several options for them. They can be conducting periodic surveys in-house, ad hoc feedback, but they haven't really standardized any kind of process or around any automation. Periodic outsourced surveys, not surprisingly the lowest of this group of alternatives considering the cost of outsourcing. But you've got some who are doing both in-house and outsourced surveys. And last, and maybe least, 12% are not conducting any surveys at all. And frankly, in today's day and age, where data rules the roost and customers are also more fickle than ever and happy to jump to your competitors, understanding how you're doing in their eyes is so critical. So, I'm kind of surprised to see that even 12%, as low a number as that is, are not surveying their customers, at least from time to time. So let me get to our panel really quickly here. Is that those 12% aside, the rest of these the companies in the survey are soliciting feedback from customers in some capacity. How good is that relative to a broader NPS program as far as understanding customer sentiment and creating actionable intelligence? Maybe can we start with Leah on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I think that, just taking that 46%, I think that if you were to do that same survey a year ago, or that same question a year ago, it'd be interesting to see where that stands. I'm actually not too surprised with that. I think if you really dissected the 46%, you'd find out a lot that they were ones that are very focused on CX in general. I think we're getting close to, right, 46 is where you get close to the tipping point. I think my prediction is once we hit it, it's going to be everywhere. I think we're already getting to be, as far as a metric, a must-have. So I'm not too surprised. I'm actually not too disappointed in that. But I'm very curious in everyone else's thoughts as well. Perhaps, Nina, I'd be interested in your take on that.
Yeah, I think looking at these alternatives for companies with no programs, I think, everyone has positive intent, right, when it comes to voice of the customer, and I think people are trying to do what they can. And so I'm not surprised to see the in-house, surveys and the ad hoc feedback. I think what's so important about kind of that NPS program, and I agree with you, Leah, about the tipping point, is that, turning those ad hoc activities into, a real program and priority and cross-functional effort is what takes, that positive intent from really gathering information to actually being able to, activate that information and really respond and support your customers in the best way possible.
Yeah, I agree on that. And I'd actually be curious on that 46%, how many had NPS, stopped doing it, and are kind of at this restart phase. I know that was certainly a story for us at MindBody, going through it, figuring out what wasn't working, not getting the buy-in, getting frustrated, giving up, trying again. So I can definitely see how people would start to explore alternatives. in place of an NPS program. Really, I think that there's room for more than one. And NPS is a great broad program to have on your relationship with customers, but you can definitely supplement that with, the Gallup CE11 or other more in-depth surveys that are out there.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Annie. I think to that, it's one of the main things I like to tell people is before I really learned NPS and joined Ask Nicely, I did NPS horribly wrong, right? Like I would just throw it out there every once in a while. And I think to your point, getting it and restarting it and getting a comfort with using it, where it's a part of your DNA, then it's a total difference. So I totally agree.
Fantastic. Let's move on a little bit. So understanding that there's a real clearly there's a difference in the level of program maturity as you move from those periodic, whether they're in-house or outsourced customer surveys, to NPS programs, whether that's moving from one to the other or using multiple strategies for integrating customer feedback. But really, the question is, how do you move from point A to point B? How do you move from not having an NPS program to having a successful and mature NPS program? And really, the 5 points that we want to get to here are you need to have an achievement of organization-wide buy-in, as you do on really any investment. But this is obviously critical at the executive level. Automation. Deploying surveys in real time across multiple channels based on customer activity. You're able to maximize the engagement. You're able to measure satisfaction when it matters and when it's top of mind. Communication. You also want to make sure that not only are you communicating with your customers, but you're communicating results of your NPS programs within your entire organization, and that organization, that everybody that's part of these different departments are made aware of the results of your feedback and can be made part of processes that are involved. You want to be able to operationalize your NPS program. You want to build it around certain pillars of growth, retention, and customer experience initiatives. And of course, as with any other investment, it's important to understand ROI. What are you getting from your NPS program, and how do you have clearly defined metrics that you can track, measure, and report to others within your organization? We do have a couple of poll questions in today's presentation. So the first of those that we want to get to, I just mentioned these 5 factors of NPS, and we'd love to know that how many of these 5 factors are you within your organization currently doing? All 5, 4 of them, 3 of them, 2, or 2 or less, excuse me, really. And while we wait for our audience to answer, let me go back to our panel. So we've got these 5 factors of maturity. As you've gone through, and I'd love to get to Annie and Nina on these. Nina, why don't we start with you? Are there, as you've gone through the process of building an NPS program, are there any one of these factors that that you find are more important or were more important?
I think 2 that I'll speak to, and I agree with Annie, is kind of we've had a little bit of a reset of NPS strategy here at Act On. One is definitely that organization-wide buy-in, and really, I think at an executive level, but then also across all levels and across all functions. One of the things I was really excited about when we kicked off our program with Ask Nicely, and Leah was actually here in our office here in Portland, and I actually took a picture. I was so excited was that we had representation in the room, not only from my team in marketing, but from our products team, our customer success team, our customer support team, and operations. And, the project was kicked off cross-functionally by our executive team, but then it was really, the leaders of those different functions in the room rolling up their sleeves to do the work. And so that was something that made me feel really good about the fact that we were on the right track. And then I think the other thing I will mention definitely is the communication of that feedback. We had always had a certain number of stakeholders within the organization getting NPS feedback and getting kind of the emails and the comments. But now to have the TV screens live in our office and seeing our score and watching it luckily go up and to the right, which is a good thing. But seeing the comments come in, positive and from promoters and detractors, we've had a lot of kind of water cooler talk in the office since we put up those TV screens, and I think it's starting to feel that even internal tipping point around creating a conversation around NPS.
And Annie, how about you?
Yeah, well, we could probably do a whole webinar just on these 5 pillars, and I'm certainly happy to dive in deeper with anyone afterwards. You can find me on LinkedIn, but real quick, we launched NPS and we just failed miserably at it, and we really only had part, I think, of number 2, which was implementing an automated NPS system and a little bit of communicating around that. We didn't have the buy-in. People didn't understand what it was. We didn't have accountability toward action. And hey, we're actually going to do some things that our customers want here that they're saying in this survey. It sounds silly, but I think that's what happens in a lot of organizations. We get focused on our functions, and we fail to really act where we need to. Since implementing, and of course we have the TV too, and it's such a great conversation starter. I have people coming over and looking at it, what's this? And from executives to frontlines, that definitely helps to get the conversation started. But more recently, we started communicating NPS results in terms of different themes. So we knew, for example, that our product needed to improve its search functionality, and that directly impacts our revenue for services booked and paid for in our app. We know that people are used to Google, they're used to really easy search experiences, and so by measuring our NPS specifically, drilling down to the search, we were able to show our product managers that we need to focus on this as a product release, and we were able to improve the NPS in that specific area and share that out. And that's such an encouraging note to send to people like product to know that, hey, the work that you did is actually seeing an impact in consumer sentiment.
Excellent, thank you. Love to take a look and see what our audience is telling us. And we've got an interesting breakdown here. We've got almost 60% telling us they're using 2 or fewer of these, or doing 2 or fewer of these five factors, and then a quarter doing 3. Leah, let me jump to you. As having some experience with with a number of customers across different industries. How do these results compare to what you've seen?
Yeah, listen, I'm not surprised. I have to echo the sentiment across what Annie and Nina have said, being 2 front runners, right, and using this. But I think the main thing here is most of the time NPS is used for the business purpose only, right? You're sitting a score out there because you want to know how you're doing. And that's where people fail quickly, because NPS should be a way to enable your business to provide world-class customer experience. And to do that, you have to have organizational buy-in. You have to have everybody from the top to the bottom of the organization believing in it and doing those steps. So I'm not surprised by it, but I think that's the key to where NPS is done, with a one-sided view.
Thank you, Leah. So that gets us into the question of progress with NPS programs once that process or once those programs have been initiated, and this is kind of interesting, and it certainly speaks to some of what Leah just mentioned. 26% of respondents say that NPS is important to how they focus on the customers and helps them create raving fans. Another 13% have an NPS program that is operationally integrated and that they can measure. That's fantastic stuff. That's really what our panel has been talking about getting at. But then we have 37% who have an NPS program in place and try to use it to improve performance but aren't able to quantify the results, and another 16% who have implemented NPS and are ready to discover how to use it effectively. There's another 9% who have an NPS program but don't use it to improve results, and those 9% certainly belong in that category that Leah just mentioned, that just kind of using the program to create or generate or show a score to others. But you've got that 37% and that 16% in the middle there, really, that have integrated or initiated programs but haven't gotten to that next phase where they're able to use that information and actually generate real results from those programs. The first two groups are in pretty good shape. The second two, that's where the opportunity lies. So the question, and Annie, why don't we start with you here? So that's obviously an important process. So how do you, in your experience, how do companies go about getting from having that program in place to learning how to understand the results and integrate the results into their businesses?
I think this is a great challenge for service leaders. I know over the years I personally just focus so much on the customer. We should do this because it's right for the customer. We care about the customer. We love the customer. But if you can't speak the language of your cohorts in finance or in product, it's going to fall on deaf ears, right? So for us, it was really a cycle of exploring, well, what are the key metrics for our organization as a SaaS company, and what are actions that we can specifically take out of NPS that will impact those? So for example, are you leveraging your promoters by actioning them to speak out on behalf of your brand through reviews and social media, creating that uplift and that positive word of mouth that generates referrals? So that's a great message to provide with your marketing team and get their buy-in about it. Similarly, knowing what is going to drive your revenue. So for us, I was saying earlier that we know our promoters are more likely to be using the app more frequently, making purchases more frequently. We get a revenue share of those bookings that happen. So we can, by creating more promoters, increase our revenue generated through our app. So it's really just looking at the NPS as part of the overall loyalty equation and understanding how it influences those. All the important cogs, revenue retention, revenue expansion. We know that if people are willing to say good things about us, they're going to stay and they're going to spend more.
Yeah, and this is Nina. I mean, I completely agree, and I think that being still kind of earlier in the journey of kind of relaunching our program, I'm thinking a lot about this and about the ROI specifically. I'm thinking, frankly, about it a lot in the same way as we would our demand gen programs and our attribution of our marketing, right? Because I think that we can have these goals in place and put this program into place, and we can start to feel like anecdotally things are changing, but I think it's really about kind of operationalizing it. How do you kind of create those dots in that pipeline to really connect the data that we're gathering with meaningful impacts to these business metrics, as Annie mentioned. So, to driving, creating more promoters, or, improving our retention, or even to, I really like what Annie said in the last comment about, specific feedback about certain areas, of your product, that then you're actioning that and you're seeing your NPS in that very specific area go up. So I think, for me, that's really our next opportunity here at Act On is moving from the program and the implementation and the activation of the data, which I think we have going on, is to that fifth factor of program maturity, which is really kind of designing the more systematic kind of ROI piece of that program.
Yeah, listen, this is Leah. I think, again, Annie and Nina are right on. There's the challenge of for service users and making sure you're listening. And I think it kind of goes back to the two important steps there of you got to have the organizational buy-in. You need the top of your organization to believe in it, but then you also need to empower your frontline staff, right, to drive more promoters. So if you believe in it as an organization, and then your frontline staff is using NPS to, to monitor what the sentiment is, to close the loop on the feedback, to make sure they're responding to it, and to take action, is the final key to just solidify a healthy, feedback circle.
Wonderful, thank you. One of the things, and Nina touched on this at the very beginning with, her comment about having rolled out a cross-functional NPS program. Really, what departments you've got, across which departments are you rolling out, or which departments are adopting your NPS program really does have an impact on what you can achieve and how much, what the ROI is that you're able to gain. I don't think it's surprising when you look across these survey results that customer success and marketing and sales are the top two among departments using NPS, and then operations, BI and biz apps, as well as product and UX coming in very close to one another as well, and then HR recruitment a little bit towards the bottom. It sort of makes sense based on the departments that have the most intimate contact and the most frequent contact with customers. But that actually brings us to our second poll question. We'd love to hear from you and our audience which departments at your companies are actively using NPS. Customer success, sales marketing, product, operations, other or none of the above, or all of the above. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. And while we wait for our audience to give us a little bit of feedback there, Nina, I'm going to jump to you. How important is it to have sort of cross-functional or multifunctional buy-in and participation in NPS programs?
I think it's critically important, and I've already spoken a little bit about how our marketing, customer success, and product teams are really engaged in our NPS efforts. But one thing I actually wanted to touch on, which is at the lower end of the list at 14%, was HR. One thing that I hadn't been as focused, as a marketing leader, I was focused on kind of the voice of the customer piece of this process, but I was really excited in our conversations with Ask Nicely actually to bring in our head of HR and our people team.
The person at extension 284 is unavailable. Please leave your message after the tone.
Can you guys hear me?
When done, hang up or press the pound key.
Hi, can you guys hear me on the line?
Yes.
Sorry, I had a strange message. I was just saying that from an HR standpoint, we were excited at Act On for our HR team to actually embrace it, and we are using now Ask Nicely to do our eNPS, our employee or our EPS, our employee promoter score. I think what's nice about that is actually that you're kind of speaking the same language, and I think from an HR program to go from similarly those quarterly or annual surveys, longer surveys, maybe lower response rates, and then kind of that big pile of data to that more real-time kind of program and that one question and following that pulse. It's been really exciting to see that function as part of the broader kind of program and process.
Hey, Eric, also, this is Mitchell. I wanted to throw in one more little bit of color on this and why we wanted to ask this question in the first place. And we see more, customer success is typically, traditionally owned in NPS, but more and more from, the customer acquisition side of things, we see more and more people from marketing and sales actually as a faster growing segment of interest in NPS. And so then that got us thinking about, what is the impact of having, say, at least two departments that are heavily vested in NPS, kind of like how Nina's talking about. And one thing that's not on the slide is we found that 25% of our respondents that are using NPS are using it in two departments, and their score tends to have about a 10% lift over companies who are just using it in one department. So I thought that really made the case.
Fantastic. Thanks. I appreciate that additional insight, Mitchell. Let's take a look and see how well our audience correlates to the survey responses. So certainly, I think not surprising here. Again, customer success and marketing way at the top, way ahead of everything else. And you got product operations, other, and all sort of kind of pretty close to one another. 14% looks like they've rolled it out across their entire organizations. Leah, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, listen, it does. And, taking drinking our own champagne, some of the feedback we got on the last webinar was, hey, give us some more examples. So I'm going to kind of break down this real quick. So for customer success, absolutely, not surprised here. If your business is heavily focused on customer experience, NPS is the no-brainer. I think what you can do there is you can empower customer success managers, support agents to handle responses to work on sentiment. You can even have gamification to who are your, top scoring customer success managers, et cetera. I think for marketing and sales, that's where you're creating your advocates. You're taking those that speak on your company's behalf better than you can, and you're helping them provide the value to future customers as well as to the market in general. I think on product, that feedback should be the focus and the changes that you make on your roadmap. On operations, it should be the DNA of your company, right? It should be front and center. You should be looking at the number. You should be wanting to grow, but you should also, most importantly, be looking way beyond the number into what does it mean, okay? Now that you're listening, how are you closing that feedback loop? How are you keeping it front and center of your organization? And then to Nina's extremely valuable point around, other and HR and internal, I think you can flip all that back and do it, the same within your organization as well. So not surprised by it, but I do think there is a lot of opportunity across the board for organizations to enhance it more on the marketing, product, sales, operations, et cetera, line of things beyond just customer success.
Excellent. Thanks, Leah. So you guys have all touched on the idea of internal buy-in or executive buy-in with several of your comments already. So it's worth taking a look at what the survey had to tell us. And again, not surprising, the majority, the strong majority of respondents say that NPS has their executive level support. There are a few who say that NPS has support, but not from the executive level, and even fewer who aren't sure or say that NPS is not important and has only a few supporters. So definitely the survey correlates very, very strongly with what we've seen here.
Eric, I have one additional bit of color that might be interesting for this one as well, and that we found that, when high-level executive support is present and reliable, that your chances of being able to accomplish those 5, being able to knock over all 5 aspects of an advanced program double. So if you want NPS to provide those sorts of results in ROI, then this isn't just a no-brainer. And it's a characteristic of companies that have faster growth and lower churn as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Mitchell. Now let's go on and talk a little bit about the process of collecting the NPS data. Not surprisingly, everybody pretty much uses email. It's kind of how we communicate these days. It's the de facto method of sending information and getting information. But I think anybody who's followed the customer engagement space of late knows that the focus is really on building omni-channel relationships. And the survey does support that, and the majority of respondents across the board are kind of looking at adding either web apps or SMS or mobile app support and or point of sale feedback to their NPS engagements. It's certainly not surprising. There are many reasons for that, including the fact that customers today want choice, and increasingly as the millennial generation becomes a bigger and bigger portion of decision makers in the workforce. In fact, they've already become the single largest population group within the U.S. workforce. They want choice. They want to have the ability to engage across the channels that they want to use, whatever's most convenient or most effective for them at the point of engagement. But there's also the success factor. Frankly, if you target customers across multiple channels, you increase your chances of getting response and getting valuable information out of them. So with that understanding, I'm going to go to Annie, and are there different channels that you've seen be more effective? Have you used all these channels within your NPS programs? What thoughts do you have on that?
We have not used all of these channels in our NPS program. I have experienced all of them as a consumer myself. But really, what I understand about these channels and what we've seen internally is response rates do vary by channel. And also the percent of respondents leaving feedback. So we all love that high response rate because it validates the reliability of our score. But if we don't have feedback related to that score, we don't know why it was given. So having multiple channels really ensures that you have both the high response rates that you want for that reliable score, but also some really great feedback on where you need to improve. So for example, if you're doing an in-app question for NPS, you may have a great response rate, but if you're asking that at the wrong point in the app experience, you could be missing out on the feedback. If you do email only, you're probably going to have a lower response rate, but when you do get people participating, you're going to have probably some great feedback because those people are probably a lot more committed. They've opened the email, they've read it, they're clicking on it. You're going to get some richer feedback. So I definitely recommend having more than one in place and whatever makes sense for your users and for your business.
That all makes sense, but I think we'd all agree that we're pretty much everybody's already drowning in emails every day. So, Nina, do you think that there are more effective channels, or is simply the ability to leverage multiple channels going to be effective in terms of increasing responses and getting your customers to answer?
I think it's the multiple channels. I think I'd bring it back as a marketer to kind of the marketing mix, right? I mean, it's the same thing. It's the channel mix here for NPS, and I would just plus one what Annie said. I think for us, what we're seeing, I think not surprisingly, is that we do have a higher response rate, as an example, in app when the question is served up when someone is using the Act On platform versus email. I don't have the data, but I do get the sense that maybe, as Annie mentioned, we're getting more comments when someone's in email because, which stands to reason, right? If you're in the app, you're a marketer, you're in the Act On platform, we're going to have a captive audience, and so you might quickly answer that question, but you're probably in the middle of building an email or a landing page or a marketing campaign, and so you're probably in the middle of what you're doing, and so maybe you're not going to stop right then and kind of give that longer answer. And so I think it's not, one is better than the other. I think it's that, having those multiple channels gives you different opportunities to kind of gather both kind of the number of feedback, but also then the quality of the comments and the feedback.
I can kind of cap that one off with, one more bit of color on this one is, kind of 30% is a good, generally kind of a good response rate to aspire to. And if you're using more than one channel, that ups your chances by about a quarter, 25% more likely to get across that 30% threshold.
So before we move on to the next slide, there's one channel that we really didn't get touched on here, and I'll throw this out to either Leah or Mitchell on the Ask Nicely side. What about good old voice and using IVR?
So it's an interesting one. I actually have never thought about that, but that also kind of makes me think of kind of the next big thing in search is sort of voice, and so I think that's just a sign of that becoming more of a trend, but we haven't really thought about it too much.
Great, thank you. So moving along, we do want to talk about how you collect data, when you collect data, the timing. Annie did mention just mentioned the question, what really is the right time to ask your customers about their experiences. If you ask at the wrong time, you're likely to get negative feedback. If you ask at the right time, you may not get 100% positive, but you're at least going to get objective feedback. So part of it is dependent on what type of NPS program you're running, relationship or transactional. Relationship NPS is more general and is typically very, very good for understanding your overall relationship with your customers, whereas transactional NPS gets more specific and typically is related to individual experiences, transactions, or engagements or interactions, such as a product purchase, for instance. You can see, I think not surprisingly, that in the survey, you've got fairly balanced response across the three different, with transactional being a little bit lower. And I think in my mind that's sort of part of the trend of people kind of focusing on that overall customer experience and not having really gotten to the point of being able to focus on individual transactions. But that also plays into the frequency of collecting data within your NPS program. How often are you going to survey your customers? It's a huge factor in how much and what kind of response you're going to get. And it's also largely dependent on what type of program you're running, transactional or relationship. It certainly looks like quarterly, based on survey responses, is the most popular alternative. And with automated or real-time at the moment of truth coming in not all that far behind that. And to me, that represents the difference between transactional and relationship NPS. Leah, does that make sense to you as well?
Yeah, listen, I'm very passionate around this one because I think there can be a lot of confusion here. So this data is really good, but let's think of this too. First best practices, which Annie and Nina have brought up on multiple occasions, is you have to know your customer. So you need to map your customer journey is the first thing you need to do. That NPS, you want to avoid survey fatigue and going back to don't do what's in your best interest because you're trying to create a world-class experience. What are those points of interaction that you're going to want to collect that sentiment, right? And I think some of the things I find people being confused on right away when they see quarterly or just ways that CS leaders, including myself, have used this improperly or not to its best advantage in the past is blasting out once a quarter to everybody, collecting that information, talking about it in a board meeting. And again, this is where if you map out the customer journey, you can hit them in that, an example would be 90-day mark after implementation. I try to send them out 4 times a year, so I'm collecting those around important parts of where they should be in that journey with us. And I think people get confused because when you see daily, we're not saying that you send everybody an NPS survey daily, right? What you're saying is you're not customizing this to fit you. You're customizing this to fit the individual.
Thank you.
So their 90-day mark is going to fit on a different day
To
than
dial another extension, enter it now. Or press 0 to return to the main menu. To go directly to another mailbox, dial *86 and then the extension number.
Sorry, a little bit of technical challenge there, which is okay. But listen, so what I'm saying is with the daily is it's almost like you're doing a drip campaign on your customers, so you're hitting them at the right moment. So if Mitchell and I joined your company at different times, we're going to get that survey on a different day. So you're sending them out daily to different people and collecting that. So that's something that I highly advise, but the big caveat there is every business is different. So my first rule for everyone is map out your customer journey and hit them at the right moment.
Wonderful, thank you. On the flip side, of course, is to how often or when or how often or how frequently should you survey your customers is response. How quickly can you and should you react to feedback and responses from your NPS program? This is interesting. And, of course, the right slide would help as well. This is interesting because 19% claim to be responding in real time within their NPS programs. 60% say they take either days, weeks, or months, and that really is kind of a long time. What you have to consider, though, is that includes both internal and external actions. But really, in a world driven by automation, it's a little surprising to me to see so few companies reacting in real time. And we'll come back to a question that relates to a couple of these slides in a couple of moments. But first, let's get to a little bit about actioning NPS and being able to respond to customers. When we look specifically at how companies respond to their customers who have done them the benefit of participating in their NPS programs, 3/4 follow up directly. Again, that's 3 times the number that don't, but I'm still a little bit surprised that 1/4 of them do not respond, and even that even fewer are using NPS data to segment customers and personalize their offers. And that, to me, gets a little bit into what Leah was talking about as well. Instead of just blasting out, on a quarterly or a monthly or semi-annual basis to your entire customer base, segment those customers, whether it's based on purchasing habits or whether it's or what other sort of timelines make sense. There are a lot of ways to do that. Do want to get along, make sure we get all of this information out to you. So we're talking a little bit about customers. We're talking about customers effectively evaluating you as their vendor or as a business partner in many ways. So the question then becomes, how effective is your NPS program? And really, that to me gets to the heart of it. How do you evaluate the effectiveness of your NPS program? The value, I think, at the end of the day, the value that you get from your program is really what matters. And it's interesting to see that fewer than half of the respondents to the survey believe that their programs are effective, while nearly a quarter say that they're actually not effective. The rest are sticking to average, and frankly, if you ask me, that's only a slight step above not being effective. I think what you really would like as the executive that buys into it and from a budgetary perspective supports these NPS programs, really you want to have highly effective, very effective programs that really do deliver results. Nina and Annie, is that how do you judge the effectiveness of your NPS programs? Annie, can we start with you?
Sure. Having implemented NPS the wrong way, I probably would have said, 2009, because our score was great, that we have a great program. And that was really naive because I didn't understand what it took to manage NPS as a driver to keep that customer focus strong. So over the years, our NPS took this slow downturn, and we started getting the light bulbs of what it actually takes to make it effective and to keep improving that score. I mean, it seems so silly, but I think so many organizations here, this is an industry standard metric, so let's measure it, and we do what we call let's break into jail, where you ask the question, but you have no intention of doing anything with it. And we went on that path, we learned from it, and we came back. And certainly today, we look at it and we know that action can mean many things. I think certainly responding to customers and thanking them, that's a minimum expectation. But if you really want to improve your service and product offerings and see that reflected in your NPS score, you've got to have that strong internal communication throughout the organization, presenting stories and advocating for the customer with priority projects that really impact that experience. And then, even more important, I think, when that NPS improves in that area, celebrating it with the organization, sharing it with the product managers or whoever that you're driving to create that change. And in that way, that helps keep the organization motivated and rallied around NPS, not as a score that you chase, but as an exercise in keeping the company customer focused.
So Nina, what's interesting here is that, according to the chart on the right-hand side here, we see 50% of companies believe that their program is better than the industry at large. However, we've already seen earlier in these slides that only 39% of respondents are using NPS meaningfully. To me, that means that they're not using that they're using it as part of their business improvement process. So if that's the case, how are they measuring this? Do these numbers make sense to you? And are there effective ways to measure against the industry and against internal benchmarks?
Ironically, I think it does make sense to me because I think this is a prime example of you don't know what you don't know. And I think, Annie mentioned it and Leah, before. I've been a career-long marketer. I would have said I've been doing NPS. I've been doing NPS my whole career, and I think I've been doing it well. But I'm not kidding when I say that I feel like I'm kind of just doing NPS for the first time, or at least doing it well. And I think, when I saw the first poll on the call today of 58% of folks on the line feeling like they're doing 2 or less of the 5 factors of NPS maturity, I was right there with you 6 months ago, probably. And so I think what's exciting is that when, benchmark studies like this and this kind of information can show you what's possible around, what does a mature NPS program look like? What are the very actionable and tactical steps to get there? And I think relative to benchmarks, I think, we all look at industry benchmarks and standards, but I think we definitely seen in the data and talked a little bit about, and I know I talked with our Ask Nicely team about the fact that really the most important benchmark is yourself, and really looking within your company and seeing where you are today, and then, setting those goals for where you want to go as a company. And so I think the first step is being on the call today and talking about how we could all be doing this better and sharing best practices, and then, looking to improve our own program. So this data doesn't surprise me, and I'm glad we're having the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Nina. Along the same lines, we've got 36% giving very strong ratings as far as recommending their NPS programs to others, and 40% say they have good programs with real results. And again, these numbers do seem to correspond very neatly with those who have implemented NPS and are actually using it to drive business results and customer relationships. So definitely some strong correlations there. What does your NPS program need to improve? Again, some correlation here. Nothing. We're happy with our program at 35%. Again, very strong in terms of how it maps to those companies who are making real progress and doing real business improvement through their NPS programs. The rest, however, I think there's a huge opportunity for improvement, including understanding what's worked for others, what's not, but really the implementation itself from that whole process, from buy-in to prioritization, once buy-in has been achieved. Leah, really quickly, are there other things besides what Annie and Nina have mentioned that are important to consider internally when evaluating success or effectiveness of NPS programs?
Yeah, listen, it's simple. Replace the acronym NPS with our customers' health. So nothing, is wrong with our customers' health. We're happy with our program. Okay, good. But I think for most of us, NPS is a fluid number. You should always be looking at ways to improve it. Don't get hung up on what your number is. It can be really high. It can be really low. It's all over the place, and dates can change, right? Seasonality is a factor in it. I think the main thing is what are we doing to improve our end users' experience, and how are we taking the feedback, closing the loop, and making ourselves a better company?
Thanks, Leah. We've this whole conversation here has been guided towards understanding what really does create and what makes a world-class NPS program. We do want to take a look at a few of the common features that have kind of been proven out among the top of the industry, the world-class NPS programs, like I said. Strong executive support, which everybody's mentioned on multiple occasions. Executives who value NPS as a process and a growth metric. Annual net churn, never more than 5%, and often net negative churn. More than 100% annual revenue growth. Outpacing competition in both growth and retention. And if you meet those criteria, you're certainly doing quite well. And as far as that one term, their net negative churn, that really represents that, over a given time period where your expansion revenue or additional revenue that you gain from any of your existing customers offsets or more than offsets any lost revenue due to customer churn. Now, like I said, if you're meeting those criteria, you're doing well. But if you've got NPS that really isn't up to standards, your numbers are going to look quite different. If you look at the bottom of this table, the bottom third of the industry, those that really need to take a look at and improve their NPS programs, you've got companies who are showing more than 40% annual churn, between 5 to 10% only annual revenue growth, overall decrease in sales, and certainly lagging behind their key direct competitors. we've heard a couple of comments about benchmarking, looking at competitors. You can take a look at some of the key industries that and how they're performing with regards to average NPS, average response rates, and things like that. You know, the insurance industry and banking coming in at the top two. And we can break, you know, the survey also breaks down those benchmarks by company size. And it certainly makes sense to take a look at these numbers, and I think Nina and Annie both touched on this a little bit. It's great to look at these, and it's great to be able to compare how you're doing against, you know, the industry at large. But really what matters is how you're improving internally, how you benchmark against your internal organization. What improvements have you made month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year? You know, that's really what you should be measuring yourself against. You know, and obviously the more responses you get, we talked about the different channels and the timing of getting out to your customers, the more data you're going to collect that will help you evaluate your business, your customer relationships, and of course your NPS program as well. You know, Mitchell mentioned that 30% is kind of a good target response rate, and as you can see, the majority of companies fall between 11 and 50%, kind of 30 being right in between those. So taking a look, factoring in 30 as kind of the target or you know, a good baseline response rate or benchmark for success in customer feedback, it's kind of not surprising to see that there is a difference within NPS programs between companies that are on either side, top or bottom of that threshold. Companies that are above a 30% response rate are sending NPS via at least 2 channels, are sending NPS at moments of truth in their customers' journeys. They send customized offers based on responses. They share reports with frontline staff, and they personalize their follow-up, all those things that Annie, Nina, and Leah have all mentioned. We do want to get we have one more poll question that we'd love to hear your feedback on. You know, you saw some numbers from within the industry and different markets and different company sizes. We'd love to hear what your current NPS score is. So thank you for taking a moment to let us know on that as well. You know, in the meantime, I'm going to go back to.
I think it'd be great. Let's jump into, while we're getting that aggregate, if it's okay, let's jump into a couple of questions that we have here that I think are really important to reach.
Absolutely. You know, we do have some questions going in. You know, here's one. How do you go about following up and tracking actions taken as a result of NPS?
Yeah, so I'll jump in on that one. Yeah, so this is Leah. I'm going to jump in on that one, and then I'll leave it to the experts, which are definitely Anna and Nina on this. But I would say, again, the timeliness of that is important. So going back to your CX journey there, your customer experience overall, like not just in customer success, but the moment they reach your company and hopefully stay throughout their life cycle with you. You know, if they're taking time out of their day to respond to you, I think it's imperative that you respond back quickly. That being said, even though I head up a team that works for an NPS company, we don't spend all of our day answering those responses. There's a lot of best practices and tips and tricks around staying ahead of that, creating workflows, different ways to manage those responses, but making sure that those that need to be heard are heard quickly, I think is extremely valuable. That being said, Nina, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that, definitely from a marketing perspective and not just as much customer success.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think that and I like Annie mentioned, I know we're kind of at the bottom of the hour, but I'm also happy to talk to anyone offline about kind of how we've really created our playbooks and our action plan. This is kind of where it gets really fun and exciting, and I think we have different work streams by function with relative to how we respond and take action relative to our promoters, passives, and detractors. And so there's a lot I think we can really dig into and here and have a conversation around.
Great, thanks. There's another interesting question here in terms of transparency on that feedback, and I think this is certainly something that at least everybody's at some point wondered about. Is there ever a concern, or how do you handle concerns about gatekeeping feedback and not sharing it, especially if there's negative feedback?
This is Nina. I would love to just jump in here because this has been a hot topic over here at Act On. This is, I think, probably a philosophical approach that, your team has to take on. Here at Act On, we've decided that we are not gatekeeping feedback, and so when we have our TV screens, it shows the real-time feedback as it comes in, and we show the scores. One thing, we're constantly fine-tuning it, so one interesting top tip is that for a while we were only showing the comments on the scores on the screen that had comments, but oftentimes, actually, I think we see more comments from our passives or detractors because they have feedback, constructive feedback to give than our promoters, and so we actually worked with Ask Nicely to change our screen widgets to set up so that we're seeing all the scores as they come in, which is nice for the team because you see all those 9s and 10s strolling in, but then you get actually those comments maybe more likely from those passives. So I think it's a case-by-case basis, but we've gone whole hog and we're not gatekeeping, and we've really found that to create a valuable conversation.
I can definitely understand the spirit of this question. If your score is lower and you have a lot of detractor feedback, it might feel really deflating to the team. I don't necessarily have the best answer on that. We show all of our feedback. We use the TV monitor, so it's constantly refreshing and it's not staring at the same stuff over and over. And I think that helps, and just supplementing that with open and honest conversation about what we are going to do, what we're not going to do based on this feedback may help that culture piece.
Yeah, I think that's great. And just to wrap it up, Eric, and also to touch on the live results of this score. First, Annie and Nina, two of the front runners in customer experience. So I actually learned from the two of these professionals on a daily basis. So very valuable information they provided. But I think overall, in the sentiment of this score in general that you're seeing from people, rating where their response or where their score is. Again, don't get caught up in the number. I think all of us probably worked hard to be A students, but NPS is not a grade score. And so it's the companies, if you think of some of the top companies in the world and threw an NPS at somebody, a lot of people are going to give the feedback of what they want to change. And so it's the results of that more than the number. And I can't iterate on that enough. To say you're a successful program because you have a score, you're missing the mark on what's in it for the customer. So it's great to see these 60 to 80 scores. That's a great thing to strive for. But at the end of the day, I think the majority of companies that are honest and that are sending out NPS scoring around their customer journeys are not that score. And they shouldn't be too focused on that.
Wonderful. Thank you. We are getting a little bit close to the end of the time that we have today. So, just a couple of quick insights to leave our audience with from the survey itself. And I think some of these are really interesting. Companies with advanced NPS program are more than twice as likely to achieve both more than 100% growth as well as net negative churn. 46% of respondents already have an NPS program. 50% of respondents, we touched on this earlier, believe their NPS is higher than average for their industry. Companies with an NPS of 60 or more who take action on customer feedback reported an average annual net churn between 0 and 5%. Customers with an NPS of 60 or greater who take action on customer feedback reported 100% growth rate over the last 12 months. And companies with low NPS who don't take action on customer feedback report more than a 40% annual churn rate. All of these things feed right back into what Nina, Annie, Leah, and Mitchell have all talked about today. So with that said, I know there are a number of questions that you guys have all still been asking. All of these questions have been archived in the system, and I know that the team will be more than happy and will get back to you offline with answers to those questions. And if you have additional questions or you want to follow up on some more of these key data points, contact information will be in your inboxes tomorrow, as well as details on how you can access the on-demand version of today's event. With that, because we are getting really close to the end of our time, I do want to give each of our panelists just one quick minute to kind of give any closing thoughts on how to create a wildly successful NPS program. Nina, we'll start with you.
Oh gosh, that's a big question. I mean, I think being here for all of us today is, starting the conversation is the first step. I think there's been some really great top tips, today. I think just like the marketers I talked to who are on a marketing journey, we're all on an NPS journey. And so I think I'm all about putting theory into practice. And so I think that there's some really great insights today. But also, I think Ask Nicely has been a really great thought partner for us to really turn theory into practice and into action. And like Annie said, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy. This is really fun stuff once you start to get into it and do it right. And so happy to talk practice with anybody. But it all starts by asking these questions and doing this good work. So good luck, everybody.
Any closing thoughts?
So this is Annie. The advice I give to service leaders comes from my own mistakes, and one is just to make friends across the organization in finance and data science and really work hard to understand the key metrics of your business. One thing that I did with our finance and data science team was we created a waterfall revenue chart that showed dollar-based net expansion. We showed where we're losing money to downgrades, cancellations. We were looking at a revenue retention, and that drove us to really focus on who is our target customer, how can we improve our retention rates. And I think it's a great exercise for any service leader to go through, and you might find in there, hey, we've got great revenue retention, so why aren't we capitalizing on this with our existing base to adopt more product and more service? In that way, you're going to show yourself as valuable to the organization and not just this cost center who's handling calls and emails like that.
And Leah.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I also want to echo the sentiment of, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk about NPS, to talk about people's programs, to give advice, and whether it's locally, grabbing a cup of coffee, or just hitting me up on LinkedIn or email. I think in addition to that, we didn't get to a lot of the questions, but I saw so much of the same question around what's a good NPS score. So again, just if there's any takeaway from this, a good NPS score is any score. Like as long as you're taking the temperature check, as long as you're checking in with your customers, and then working to strive to go better. If you want more detail than that, we will be following up with these questions for everyone involved, and available for hopefully, keep an eye out for future webinars as well. It's always a lot of fun.
Well, I thank everybody on our panel today, and certainly would encourage anyone in our audience who wants to follow up with any of our panelists. Remember, they all acknowledge having done NPS really poorly or failing miserably at one point or another, and now here are talking publicly about it. So that should clue you in as to how good of a resource they may be for helping you build your NPS programs as well. I do want to thank Nina Church-Adams, Annie Wu, Leah Cheney, and Mitchell Hansen, for joining us on this panel, and the folks at Ask Nicely for sponsoring today's webinar. Hope you found some of this information useful. Hope you can use it to build your NPS programs as well. And again, thanks for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon, everybody.